I put on a black suit and a costume shop cap and spent 6 weeks driving my own son's fiancée around Chicago while she called me the help to my face. And by the time that woman found out whose father she'd been snapping her fingers at, she had already lost the ring, the wedding, and the one thing she wanted more than either. Hey, hold on 1 second before I get going, because I want to say thank you for showing up here today. That's not nothing to me. I mean that. Here's what I'd love from you. Put your city down in the comments, wherever you're sitting right now, because I read every single one of them, and I'll shout you out by name next time around. And that like button and that subscribe. Listen, that's the whole ball game for somebody like me doing this out of a garage. Okay, so June 18th, I'm doing 70 on the Edens northbound. Black Suburban, heading up to Winnetka to look at a wedding venue. She's in the back with her friend Camilla, and she's got her mother on speaker, and her mother's going through the staff list for the wedding. And I hear her say, word for word, and I have not lost one syllable of this, and I never will. She says, Mother, don't put the driver on the list. The help doesn't need a name, just a phone number. The help doesn't need a name. And Camilla laughed, and I'm 18 inches in front of this woman with my hands at 10 and 2, and I didn't move my face. I didn't move anything, because that's the job. That was week 2. Week 1, she snapped her fingers at me, actually snapped them, 2 fingers, up over the seat because the air was too cold, the way you'd do at a dog that got on the couch. Week 2. Before the Edens, I stood on Rush Street in a June downpour holding a door open on an empty sidewalk for 22 minutes. And I timed it because I time everything. And when she finally came out, she got in dry and I got in soaked. And she said into her phone, out loud, doing a voice, Ugh, my new driver's like a wet Labrador. She never said my name. Not once in 6 weeks. She never got it wrong. Understand me. She never used one. I was driver. And here's what I need you to hold on to while I back up and tell you who I actually am. Because I'm gonna back up. That's how this works. Hold on to that sentence about the phone number. Because 8 days after she said it, that woman had me face down over the hood of a car in my own son's driveway, with my hands cuffed behind my back, and she stood on the steps in a bathrobe and watched. Okay, me. My name's Walt, 63, 31 years driving refrigerated freight out of a warehouse in Bedford Park. Restaurant runs all over Cook County, up at 3:40 every morning, on the Stevenson before the sun. 2 bad knees, 1 good shoulder, a pension that covers what I need and nothing I want. My wife was Kathleen. She died in 2019. Pancreatic, 11 weeks start to finish, and she's out at St. Adalbert's in Niles. I wear her St. Christopher on a chain under my shirt every day of my life. Remember the medal? It comes back, and when it does, it about took my head off. And then there's Danny, my kid, my only one. Danny went to U of I on scholarship, got into computers, and when he was 26, he built software that figures out how freight moves. Routing, load matching. I don't understand it, and I'm not going to pretend. Here's what I do understand. My boy sat at my kitchen table in Norwood Park in 2011 with a laptop and asked me about my job for 4 hours. What slows a driver down? Where the dock backs up, he filled a legal pad with my complaining, and then he built a company out of my complaining. It's called Kestrel. It went public 4 years ago. Danny's worth about $2.1 billion. I say that the way you'd read it off a page, not the way a father brags. And the money never took. That's the thing about him. He's got a house on Burling Street in Lincoln Park that cost more than my whole block, and he still shows up at my place on Sunday in a Bears hoodie with a bag of Italian beef and eats standing up over my sink like he's 15 years old. calls me every Wednesday night, has for years, doesn't matter where he is. So when he called in April and said he was getting married, I cried in my kitchen like a big dumb baby and put my hand on Kathleen's picture on the fridge and said, "Hey, he's getting married." Then I met her, Sloan Whitaker Price, with a hyphen, and that hyphen worked overtime. 31, gorgeous in a way that looks assembled, like it took a crew. Family money 3 generations back, real estate up on the North Shore. Her mother goes by Bitsy, and yes, that's a grown woman who says Bitsy out loud. And the first time Bitsy shook my hand, she looked at my hands. Not my face. My hands priced me out in half a second and filed me. Dinner at Danny's. Sloan was perfect with me. Asked about my knees, laughed in the right spots, called me Mr. Dolan after I told her twice it was Walt. And I want to be honest, because if I'm not honest, this whole thing's worthless. I had no proof that night. I had an itch on my neck, that's it. Same itch you get backing a 53-foot trailer into a dock when something's wrong and you can't name it. You just know to get out and look. Here's what I actually saw. She's pouring wine and the caterer's kid, young guy, 19 maybe, drops a serving spoon. Little clatter. Nothing. And for 1 second, her face changed. And then it changed back. 1 second. I've read faces from a driver's seat for 31 years. Dispatchers, dock supervisors, guys who will shake your hand and dock your run in the same minute. And I know exactly what that second is. That second is who somebody is when they think nobody's grading them. I drove home on the Kennedy at 11 at night with my stomach in a knot going, "Walt, you're an old man with a feeling." 2 weeks later, I figured out what to do about it, and I've been paying for it ever since. Danny's driver is a guy named Tomas Delgado. Berwyn, 5 years with him, 4 grandkids, keeps hard candy in the console. In May, Tomas finally scheduled the hip he'd been putting off. 6 weeks out, Danny mentioned it on a Wednesday call. Offhand, said the agency was sending a temp, and Sloan was already complaining. And I heard myself say, "Don't call the agency." He goes, "What?" I said, 3 decades behind the wheel, clean CDL, clean record, and I've been bored out of my skull since 2019. Let me drive you. That last part was dirty pool, and I knew it when it left my mouth. He got quiet because he knows what happened in 2019. And then I lied. I'm not going to dress it up. I said, "Don't tell Sloan it's me. Let me just be the driver. She'll be looser. She won't feel the father-in-law watching. And I'd rather know her from the cheap seats than across a table where everybody's performing." He laughed. He actually thought it was funny. Told her the agency sent a guy named Walt Novak. Novak was Kathleen's maiden name. 2 black suits off the rack on Milwaukee Avenue. Cap from a costume shop in Jefferson Park, $11, made me look like a dope. June 3rd, 6:40 in the morning, I backed that Suburban out of the garage on Burling and sat there looking at myself in the mirror thinking, "Walter, you are a 63-year-old man playing dress-up. If I'd known where it was going, I'd have driven that truck into the lake. The first 2 weeks, she barely registered I existed. And I already told you about the fingers and the rain. And the Edens. What I didn't tell you about is the 12th. June 12th, I drove Danny downtown for a meeting, and there was a second passenger. Adrian Vance, my son's estate attorney, the man who wrote the prenup. Silver hair, pocket square, 45 maybe. One of those guys with a very warm handshake and eyes doing arithmetic behind it. He gets in, and Danny says, "Adrian, this is Walt. He's covering for Tomas." And Vance says, "Morning," without looking up from his phone, which fine, whatever. Half the world does that. Then Sloan got in, and that's when I saw it. And at the time, I did not know what I was seeing. That's the honest truth. I filed it and forgot it for 5 weeks. They didn't talk. That's what was wrong. Two people who'd both been at that house 100 times, both in the wedding, and they rode from Burling to Wacker without one word to each other. Total silence. Danny's talking the whole way, and those two are sitting on either side of him like strangers on the blue line. And when we hit the curb on Wacker, Vance got out and buttoned his jacket and said, "Sloan, lovely to see you," in this stiff, formal voice. And she said, "You as well, Adrian." Same voice. And I remember thinking, that's a lot of manners for two people who see each other every week. Write it down, is what I'm telling you. Whatever the itch is, write it down. Because 5 weeks later, that ride is gonna mean something. June 26th, Thursday. Danny was in Dallas overnight for Kestrel. I dropped her at Burling at 9:40, put the truck away, and went in through the mudroom to hang the fob on the board. Like every night for 3 weeks, grabbed my suit jacket off the coat hook in there because it was 91 degrees, and I'd left it hanging that morning. Went home. 11:20 at night, my phone rings. House line. It's her, and she's doing a whole performance, voice shaking. She goes, "This is Miss Whitaker Price. I need you back at the residence immediately." I said, "Ma'am, is Danny okay?" She goes, "Just come back." I'm 63, and I don't do well with a phone ringing at 11:20, because the last time a phone rang at 11:20, it was Rush calling about Kathleen. So I drove my own beat-up CRV back down there in 25 minutes. Chicago police squad in the driveway, second one on the street. 2 officers out of the 18th. Her in the doorway in a robe with her arms folded, and on the kitchen island in a little plastic bag. A Cartier bracelet, the gold one with the screws. Hers. She looks at the officers and she points at me. Points. One finger. That's him. That's the driver. It was in his coat, and it was. Inside pocket of my black suit jacket, hanging on that hook, and they'd already pulled it and bagged it before I ever got there. I'd love to tell you I stayed calm. I said something like, "That's insane. What are you talking about?" And I stepped forward, and the older officer put a hand up and said, "Sir." And I kept talking, and that's when it turned. They cuffed me in the driveway. Under those big carriage lights, my son picked out himself, 63 years old, hands behind my back, in my kid's driveway, at midnight. And they took my property, wallet, keys, phone, and the chain off my neck. And I said, hey, that was my wife's. And the young officer, who was decent about it. He really was decent, he said, "Sir, it'll be in property. You'll get it back." Kathleen St. Christopher went into a manila envelope with a barcode on it. That's the part I still can't get past. Not the cuffs, the envelope. And right before they walked me to the car, she came out on the steps and stood there with her arms crossed and looked right at me and said, "I hope it was worth it." I sat on a bench at the 18th on Larrabee until 4 in the morning. They didn't charge me that night. The bracelet's $8,000. That's felony territory. But the sergeant looked at the whole picture and looked at me and said, "Sir, what's your relationship to this household?" And I said, "I'm the driver," because I'd made a promise. And because sitting on that bench, wrecked, humiliated, one thought was going around my head over and over, and it was not, "I have to clear my name." It was, "She has done this before. You don't do that clean the first time." The voice on the phone, the finger, the line on the steps. That's a woman with reps. They cut me loose at 4:10 in the morning pending review, and I stood out on Larrabee holding my dead wife's medal in an envelope waiting on a ride. And I made the call right there on the sidewalk. I was going back to work. Yeah. I know how that sounds. My sister still thinks I'm insane, and she's probably right. But look at the 2 roads. Road 1, I walk into Danny's house Monday and say, "Son, your fiancé called the cops on your father." And she says, "Oh my God, Danny, your father was impersonating staff and spying on me in my own home, and I found her jewelry in his pocket." And I did what anybody would do. Read that back. Who sounds crazy in that story? Me. I lied for 3 weeks and put on a costume, and she can prove every bit of it. Road 2. I get back in the seat and shut my mouth and let her keep going, because she wasn't gonna stop. That kind never stops. They only ever escalate. And the only reason she burned a driver on a Thursday in June is because a driver was in her way on a Thursday in June. Danny called me Friday morning. She'd already gotten to him, obviously. Called him in Dallas at midnight crying about a break-in. So my kid calls me and goes, "Dad, listen, there was a thing last night. Some agency guy stole from Sloan. Are you okay?" I said, "Danny, I'm the driver." Silence. Then, "Oh my God, Dad, oh my God." I said, "I need one thing from you, and I need you to not ask me why yet. Tell her the agency guy got cleared and he's coming back. Don't defend me. Don't fight with her. 3 weeks. He said, "Absolutely not. I'm flying home tonight." I said, "Daniel." And he stopped, because I've used my son's full name maybe 6 times in his life, and every one of them mattered. He gave me 3 weeks. Monday morning, she came down the steps, and there was 1 second, the same second as the serving spoon, where she was calculating. Then it smoothed over, and she got in and said, "Oak Street." She never mentioned it. Not one word. Not sorry about the mix-up, not, "Oh, they cleared you." Nothing. Like it never happened. And that's when I stopped feeling anything about her at all, which is probably the most dangerous she ever made me. Now, the proof. Here's what Sloan never thought about once, because to a woman like that, the car is furniture. Every vehicle in Danny's household runs a Kestrel Fleet unit. That's my son's own product. Same box that's in 11,000 freight trucks in this country. Logs ignition, GPS every 15 seconds, door events, dwell time at every stop. And it writes all of it to Danny's account because Danny owns the company that makes the thing. It had been doing that since the day the truck was delivered. I didn't hack anything. I didn't plant anything. That truck had been keeping a diary for 2 years, and nobody ever thought to read it. And I'll be honest about the other thing, because I don't want you thinking I'm a saint. After the 26th, I bought a dash camera, $200 one with the cabin lens and the microphone, stuck it up behind the mirror, and I recorded her. 10 days of her. It was gold. Absolute gold. By week 5, that woman was having entire phone conversations in the back seat like I was upholstery. I took the card out to a lawyer named Frank Kowalski in Park Ridge, guy I've known since the 80s. Frank listened to about 4 minutes and reached over and hit stop. He said, "Walt, where'd you get this?" I told him. He took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes and said, "Buddy, this is Illinois. Illinois is a 2-party state. You record somebody's private conversation without consent here. You're not the man with the evidence. You're the man with an eavesdropping charge." Frank said it flat. He said, "Walt, if this walks into a courtroom, the only defendant in the room is you." So I sat in Frank's office on a Tuesday holding the best proof I would ever get in my hand, and it was worth less than nothing. And I felt 63 for the first time in my life. Then Frank said the thing that cracked it open. He said, "You can't use what she said, but you can use where she was. The truck knows where she was." We pulled the fleet logs. Danny's account, Danny's vehicle, Danny's data, clean as glass. 62 days. 14 times in 9 weeks. That Suburban sat outside a residential tower on East Delaware in Streeterville. Dwell time between 50 minutes and 3 hours. 14 times. Nobody in her life lived on East Delaware. Adrian Vance lived on East Delaware. And I'm sitting there in Frank's office and my ears start ringing because I'm back on Wacker Drive on June 12th, watching 2 people who'd both been to that house 100 times say "lovely to see you" like they'd met at a fundraiser. Then Frank, who is a good lawyer and a beautifully mean man. Frank goes, "Okay, so if he's with her, what's he billing?" Kestrel gets Vance's invoices. Danny signs them. A client reading a bill he pays is not spying. 9 of those 14 nights, Adrian Vance had billed Kestrel for work. Client conference. Trust amendment review. 0.8 hours here, 1.2 there. Billing my son at $1,100 an hour on the exact nights the truck says his fiancée was upstairs in that man's condo for 2.5 hours. He billed my kid for the affair. He billed him for it. And then we found the amendment. Vance had drafted a modification to the prenuptial agreement back in March, sitting in a folder, polished, waiting for signature before the wedding. And what it did, inside about 900 words of language that would put a horse down, was flip a chunk of Danny's post-IPO shares from separate property into marital property on the 2nd anniversary. Automatic. No conditions. A trap door with a 2-year timer on it. Vance was going to slide it to Danny in a stack of wedding paperwork the week of the ceremony. Sign here, initial. And my kid, who trusts people because I raised him to trust people. God forgive me. My kid signs it. The last piece was the dumbest, simplest thing in the world. That mudroom has a camera. Of course it does. There's one on every door of that house. And the mudroom, one covers the coat hooks because that's the door to the garage. June 26th, 9:58 at night. 18 minutes after I dropped her and drove home. 41 seconds of Sloane Whitaker Price in a bathrobe walking to my suit jacket on that hook, looking back over her shoulder at the doorway, sliding her own bracelet into the inside pocket, smoothing the jacket flat with her hand twice, and walking out. I watched it on a laptop at Frank's kitchen table, and I put my head down on my arms like a kid at a desk and cried until I couldn't get air. Not over the bracelet, over the Wednesday calls, because for 3 weeks that woman had watched me hold an umbrella in the rain, and she'd already decided I was a thing you throw away, and if she'd do that to a stranger over nothing, what was she gonna do to my son over $2 billion? And then 4 days out from the party, she found the camera. July 15th, she got in the back and dropped an earring, and she's down on the floor mat feeling around for it, and when she came up, her eyes went over my shoulder and stopped. She didn't say a word, not one. She just reached forward, past my ear, and pulled it off the windshield. Slow, took her time about it, and she sat back with it in her lap, and turned it over and popped the card out with her thumbnail. And she looked at the back of my head in the mirror for what felt like a year. And then, and I swear to God, she smiled. 10 minutes later, I'm on Lakeshore Drive with a woman in my backseat holding a felony in her fist. Frank was not calm about it. Frank said, "Walt, if she walks that card into the 18th, you get charged. And it does not matter one bit what's on it. The recording is the crime." He said they arrest you Thursday, and your son's engagement party is Saturday. I did not sleep for 4 nights. I want to be straight with you about that. I sat in my garage in Norwood Park at 3 in the morning with a beer. I didn't drink, thinking 63 years, 31 of them clean behind a wheel, and I'm going to go out as the creep who bugged a woman's car. And she knew it. That's why she smiled. She had it, and she was sitting on it, because a card is worth more in your hand than in a police station. And Sloane Whitaker Price has always understood exactly what a thing is worth. She never got the chance to spend it. That's the only reason I'm sitting here. July 19th, the Chicago Athletic Association on Michigan Avenue, the old one across from the park. Big room, high ceilings, 160 people. Whitaker Price is wall to wall, Bitsy and Green. Camilla at table 2, and Vance at the front, 2 seats from Sloane, drinking my son's champagne. Danny had the slideshow cued on the big screen. Baby pictures. The proposal in Positano. And I was in the black suit and the $11 cap standing at the coat check, because that's where the driver stands. She gave her toast. Beautiful toast, I'll give her that. She's a professional. Talked about how Danny never let the money change him. Said my Danny still eats standing up over the sink. My line about my son. To 160 people. Then Danny stood up with his glass and said he had one thing to add, and he nodded at the AV kid. The slideshow cut. Mudroom, 9:58 p.m., 41 seconds. You could hear a fork touch a plate. That's the only sound in that room. 160 people watching a woman in a bathrobe put her own bracelet into a stranger's coat pocket on a screen the size of a garage door. It played twice. Danny had it looping. That's my kid, and I don't know where he got that, 'cause it wasn't from me. Somebody at table 9 said, "Wait, whose coat is that?" And Camilla stood up. That's the part nobody talks about. Camilla, who laughed on the Edens, stood up at table 2 and picked up her clutch and slid her chair back and walked out through 160 people staring, in heels, on marble, and you could hear every step she took. Sloane said her name once. Camilla did not turn around. Then Bitsy got up and went for the microphone. Of course she did. Got her hand on it and started in with everyone. Obviously there's been a terrible misunderstanding. And Danny let her go. Let her talk. 20 seconds, 30, while she smoothed it out for the room in that voice. And the whole time, the 41 seconds is still playing over her head, on the loop, over and over. Robe, hook, pocket, smooth it flat. Robe, hook, pocket, smooth it flat. She stopped talking on her own. Nobody made her. She just heard herself and stopped, and she put the microphone down on the table and sat, and Bitsy Whittaker Price did not say another word for the rest of that night. And Vance was already up, going for the side door with his napkin still in his belt. And Danny said, into the mic, "Adrian, sit down." He sat, in front of everybody. A grown man in a $2,000 suit sat back down because a 33-year-old told him to. And Danny read him his own invoice, out loud, off his phone. March 11th, client conference, 1.2 hours, $1,320. April 2nd, trust amendment review, 0.8 hours. He read 6 of them, date, description, amount, and after each one he said the same 6 words. And Adrian, where were you that night? 6 times. Nobody answered. Nobody in that room was breathing. And on the 7th one, Danny said, "That's fine." The truck answered already. That's when Vance broke and went for the door, anyway. And Frank Kowalski was standing at it, because Frank had been standing at that door for 40 minutes waiting for exactly that, and Frank put an envelope in his hand and said, "Hi, Adrian," and Vance took it. Reflex. Guy hands a lawyer an envelope. The lawyer takes it. Copy of the ARDC complaint. Filed that Tuesday. And then I took the cap off. I'm not going to pretend I had a speech. I walked from the coat check to the front of that room, past 160 people, who figured it out at about the same time, and I stood there holding an $11 hat in both hands. Her face went through 4 things. None of them were sorry. The last one was arithmetic. She was still doing arithmetic, and I said the only thing I had. I said, "My name's Walt. I know you didn't need it, but I've got one." She went for Danny's arm, and he stepped back. Nothing dramatic. 1 step, like stepping off a curb. Vance surrendered his license 14 months later rather than sit through the hearing. His firm cut him loose in 8 days. 8. She got charged. Filing a false police report is a felony in this state. She took a plea, probation, community service, and it sits in the Cook County system with her name on it. And any lawyer with a search bar finds it in 9 seconds for the rest of her life. Her name, the one she was so proud of, the one she hyphenated. The trapdoor never got signed. There was no wedding. The venue in Winnetka kept the deposit, and Bitsy called Danny's office 11 times about it. 11 times about a deposit. The card, in case you're wondering, she never turned in. Frank thinks the second that footage hit the screen, she understood that walking into a police station was the worst move available to her. Maybe. I think she just lost interest in me. I was never a person to her anyway. I was a phone number, and you don't press charges against a phone number, but it wasn't free. The state's attorney's office reviewed the whole mess and declined, and that review cost me $11,000 in Frank's time, money I did not have, and Frank still tells me I'm an idiot. He's right. I'd do it again, and he'd still be right. Both of those are true, and I've stopped trying to make them fit. Danny's okay. I'm not going to lie and say he bounced. He was gutted for about 5 months, rough shape, calling me Wednesdays, and mostly just breathing on the phone. He's seeing somebody now, a doctor, a real one, works with kids up at Lurie's. And the first time she met me, she called me Walt inside of 4 minutes and asked about the trucks, and then actually listened to the answer. I got Kathleen's medal back out of property on a Wednesday morning, envelope with a barcode. I sat in my car in the lot on Larrabee and put it back on and sat there a good long while. And now most nights I'm in the garage in Norwood Park with the door up and the radio low and the socks losing and a beer I nurse for 2 hours on account of the knee medication. Tomas comes by sometimes. Hip's great, by the way. We don't say much. The cap's on a nail over the workbench. $11. Kathleen would have laughed herself sick at that cap. She'd have gotten one look at me in it and been done for the night. So here's what I've got for you, and it isn't clever. Watch how somebody talks to a person who can't do one single thing for them. The kid who drops the spoon, the guy holding the umbrella. I called it a test for 6 weeks, and I was wrong about that. It isn't a test. It's just sitting out in the open where anybody could see it, and most of us are too polite to look, me included, for 63 years. I looked once. It cost me 11 grand, and 4 nights of sleep and my son's whole engagement, and my sister still won't talk to me about it. Yeah, I'd hold the umbrella again.